In the glittering world of international business and ancient family traditions, some agreements are made with cool calculation, others with desperate hope. When 35-year-old Rashid Al-Hashimi, heir to one of Dubai's most influential petroleum dynasties, made an unprecedented offer to 19-year-old American college student Maya Jensen, neither of them could have predicted how a simple business arrangement would shatter every wall they'd built around their wounded hearts. This is a story about two people from vastly different worlds, one seeking to honor his family's expectations while protecting his heart, the other fighting to build a future from the rubble of her shattered dreams, who discovered that sometimes the most unexpected connections become the most transformative. What began as a transaction evolved into something neither money nor tradition could define, teaching them both that love recognizes no borders, respects no timelines, and answers to no authority except the human heart's deepest yearning for authentic connection. The fluorescent lights of Miller's diner cast harsh shadows across Maya Jensen's tired face as she refilled coffee cups for the third time that evening. At 19, she should have been worrying about midterm exams and weekend plans, but instead, she was calculating whether her tips would cover both her mother's insulin and the electric bill. Her biology textbook lay open beneath the counter, its pages marked with coffee stains and desperate highlights. She'd been awake for 36 hours straight, juggling double shifts at the diner with her classes at community college, and the exhaustion was beginning to show in the slight tremor of her hands. Her mother's cancer treatment had depleted their savings years ago, and the medical bills kept piling up like an avalanche she couldn't outrun. Maya had learned to smile through the pain, to nod politely when rude customers snapped their fingers, to pretend that her dreams of becoming a marine biologist weren't slowly drowning under the weight of financial reality. But tonight, watching the well-dressed businessmen at table 12 order another round of expensive steaks, something inside her cracked just a little bit more. Rashid Al-Hashimi wasn't accustomed to American diners with their plastic menus and bottomless coffee refills. The 35-year-old billionaire typically dined in Michelin-starred restaurants or private clubs where membership cost more than most people earned in a year. But tonight, escaping from another suffocating business dinner where colleagues pressed him about marriage prospects and family obligations, he'd asked his driver to take him somewhere, anywhere, that felt real. The diner's honest simplicity appealed to him immediately. He watched the young waitress moving between tables with practiced efficiency despite obvious exhaustion, noticing how she paused to help an elderly customer read the menu, how she slipped an extra bread roll to a homeless man who'd ordered only coffee. There was something in her eyes, a fierce determination mixed with barely concealed desperation, that reminded him of himself 10 years ago, before wealth and responsibility had built walls around his heart. When she approached his table with her order pad and forced smile, he found himself studying her more carefully than the menu, sensing a story in every tired line of her. "Young face, what can I get you, sir?" Maya asked, her pen poised over the order pad, trying not to stare at the man's expensive watch that probably cost more than her car. She'd served plenty of wealthy businessmen before, but something about this customer was different. He wasn't checking his phone or treating her like she was invisible. Instead, he was looking at her with an intensity that made her self-conscious about the coffee stain on her uniform and the strands of blonde hair escaping from her ponytail. His dark eyes held an unexpected kindness, and when he smiled, she noticed it didn't quite reach his eyes, as if he'd forgotten how genuine happiness felt. "The special is meatloaf tonight," she added, reciting her usual script. "Comes with mashed potatoes and green beans." She watched him close the menu without really looking at it, his attention still fixed on her face with an unnerving focus. "Actually," he said in accented English that somehow made even casual words sound elegant, "I'd like to make you a rather unusual offer, one that could change your life completely." Maya's grip tightened on her pen, her exhaustion-fogged brain trying to process his words, wondering if this was some kind of joke or if she'd finally reached the point where sleep deprivation caused hallucinations. 3 hours later, Maya sat in the leather booth of Rashid's hotel suite's sitting room, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she hadn't touched, trying. to comprehend the surreal turn her evening had taken. The suite was bigger than her entire apartment, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights and furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. Rashid sat across from her, his jacket removed and tie loosened, looking somehow both more human and more intimidating without the formal armor of business attire. "I need a wife," he'd said simply, as if he were ordering room service instead of proposing a life-altering arrangement. Not a real marriage, you understand, a business arrangement. You would accompany me to Dubai for 6 months, play the role of my devoted spouse for my family and business associates, and in return, I'll pay you $1 million. Maya's mind reeled with the impossibility of it all. This morning she'd been worried about making rent. Tonight a stranger was offering her enough money to solve every problem she had. It felt like a fairy tale, except fairy tales didn't. Usually involve legal contracts and non-disclosure agreements. "Why me?" Maya finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper, her practical mind fighting against the desperate hope blooming in her chest. "You could hire a professional actress, someone sophisticated who knows how to handle your world." Rashid leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expression serious. "Because you're real," he said quietly. "Everyone in my world is performing, always calculating angles and advantages. But when I watched you tonight at the diner, I saw someone genuine, someone fighting against impossible odds with dignity and determination. My family would see through a trained actress immediately. They've been watching me dodge their matchmaking attempts for years. But you have an honesty about you that money can't manufacture." He paused, studying her face carefully. "And I need that authenticity because this isn't just about fooling my family. It's about buying time, 6 months to prepare my business for the future I want, instead of the one my father's will dictates. In 6 months I turn 36, and according to his terms, if I'm not married, my inheritance goes to my uncle's sons, cousins who would destroy everything my father built." Maya's practical side screamed that this was insane, that she should thank him politely and return to her familiar struggle rather than diving into unknown complications. But her eyes kept drifting to her phone, where 17 unread messages from the hospital's billing department waited like a ticking time bomb. $1 million would pay off her mother's medical debt, cover her college tuition, give her the chance to actually become the marine biologist she dreamed of being since childhood. "I need guarantees," she heard herself saying, surprising them both with her boldness. "Legal contracts, stating the exact terms, the payment schedule, what happens if either of us wants out early. I need to know my mother will be taken care of if something happens to me over there, and I need time to think about this, at least 24 hours before I sign anything." Rashid's expression shifted to something like respect. "Of course," he said, pulling out his phone. "My attorney will draw up preliminary agreements tonight. We can review them tomorrow afternoon. But Maya," he looked at her intently, "you should know that this arrangement, while technically a business transaction, will require us to be convincing as a married couple. That means spending significant time together, learning about each other, appearing affectionate in public. Can you do that?" Maya didn't sleep that night. She sat in her tiny apartment, surrounded by medical bills and college loan statements, while her mother slept peacefully in the next room thanks to the pain medication Maya had stretched dangerously thin to afford. The contract Rashid's lawyer had messengered over was 40 pages of dense legal language, but the key points were clear. 6 months in Dubai as Rashid's wife, all expenses paid, plus $1 million deposited in increments, half up front, the remainder upon successful completion. The contract included provisions for her mother's immediate medical care, a complete wardrobe appropriate for her role, and a generous monthly stipend for incidentals. There were also clauses about public behavior, media interactions, and maintaining the fiction of their marriage with convincing intimacy. It was simultaneously the most ridiculous and most practical document she'd ever seen. As dawn broke over her neighborhood's tired buildings, Maya realized she'd already made her decision, probably the moment Rashid had mentioned her mother's care, if she was honest with herself. This was her chance to give her mom the treatment she deserved, to finish school without drowning in debt, to breathe without the constant weight of financial catastrophe pressing down on her chest. At noon, Maya walked into Rashid's hotel suite wearing her best dress, a thrift store find she'd saved for job interviews, and carrying a folder with her own list of requirements. She'd spent the early morning hours adding clauses to protect herself, consulting with a legal aid attorney who'd been too stunned by the situation to charge her for the emergency consultation. "I'll do it," she said without preamble, setting her folder on the coffee table between them. But with modifications. She watched Rashid's eyebrows rise slightly, a hint of amusement touching his serious features. "I need my mother transferred to the best oncology center in the country before we leave. I need a separate return ticket that I can use at any time, no questions asked. And I need it in writing that if your family becomes abusive or if I feel unsafe for any reason, the contract can be terminated immediately with no penalty to me." She held his gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated by the power imbalance between them. "Also, we need ground rules about physical intimacy. I understand we need to appear affectionate, but I need clear boundaries about what that means." Rashid stood and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs, wondering if she'd pushed too hard, if her demands had destroyed the opportunity before it began. But when he turned back to face her, there was something like admiration in his dark eyes. "You're wiser than many twice your age," he said quietly. "Yes, to all your conditions. Your mother will be transferred to Sloan Kettering immediately. I've already had my medical concierge service begin arrangements. The plane ticket with your name will remain in your possession. And regarding intimacy," he moved closer, his expression serious, "I need you to understand something. This arrangement is about survival, not desire. My world will expect us to appear devoted, to hold hands, perhaps embrace or kiss in public. But in private, we maintain separate bedrooms and separate lives. I'm not looking for a real relationship, Maya. I'm looking for a partner in a very specific performance." He paused, studying her face. "Can you separate yourself enough to play that role, to pretend affection for cameras while maintaining emotional distance in reality?" Maya thought about the years she'd spent pretending she wasn't terrified about her mother's illness, pretending she didn't mind being the scholarship kid among wealthy classmates, pretending she believed everything would somehow work out. "Yes," she said firmly, "I can pretend." The next 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind that left Maya dizzy with unreality. Her mother was indeed transferred to Sloan Kettering, where a team of specialists immediately began an aggressive treatment protocol that her previous doctors had deemed too expensive to consider. Maya quit both her jobs, an act that felt simultaneously liberating and terrifying, and began an intensive crash course in becoming Mrs. Rashid Al-Hashimi. A personal shopper filled her apartment with designer luggage, each piece probably costing more than she'd earned in months. An etiquette consultant taught her which fork to use at formal dinners and how to greet dignitaries without accidentally causing international incidents. A language tutor began teaching her basic Arabic phrases, though the tutor admitted 6 months wouldn't make her fluent. Most surreally, a stylist transformed her appearance, not changing her essentially, but enhancing what was already there with expensive haircuts, professional makeup, and a wardrobe that made her barely recognize her own reflection. Through it all, Rashid appeared periodically, observing her lessons with an inscrutable expression, occasionally offering corrections or encouragement, but maintaining the emotional distance he'd promised. The wedding itself was a small civil ceremony in a judge's chambers, witnessed only by their attorneys and required for the legal paperwork. Maya wore a simple cream dress, nothing like the elaborate gown she'd imagined as a little girl, and Rashid wore a dark suit that probably cost more than her car. When the judge asked if she took this man to be her lawfully wedded husband, Maya looked into Rashid's eyes and saw the same careful guardedness she felt in her own heart. "I do," she said, her voice steady despite the surrealism of marrying a stranger for money. When Rashid slipped the wedding band onto her finger, a stunning ring featuring a blue diamond surrounded by smaller white diamonds, his touch was surprisingly gentle, his dark eyes searching her face as if looking for signs of regret. The kiss that sealed their union was brief and chaste, a mere brush of lips that nonetheless sent an unexpected current through Maya's body. It meant nothing, she reminded herself firmly. They were actors in a play, nothing more. But as they signed the marriage certificate and posed for the required photographs, Maya couldn't quite shake the feeling that she'd just crossed a threshold from which there would be no simple return. Their flight to Dubai was scheduled for the following week, giving Maya precious final days with her mother. Maya Jensen had been stunned by the sudden turn in her daughter's circumstances, and Maya had carefully explained the situation as an unexpected opportunity, a job offer too good to refuse, working as a cultural liaison for an international businessman. The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but the truth was too complicated and potentially worrying for her mother's fragile health. "You deserve this happiness, baby," Linda said from her hospital bed, her eyes bright with tears despite her weakness. "You've sacrificed so much for me. Don't you worry about anything here. Just go live your life." Maya held her mother's thin hand, memorizing the feel of it, fighting against the fear that 6 months might be too long, that her mother's illness might take a turn she wouldn't be there to witness. "I'll call every day," Maya promised, "and if anything changes, anything at all, I'm on the first flight back." She didn't mention that Rashid had already arranged for round-the-clock private nursing care, or that her mother's medical team now included specialists who previously would have been financially impossible. Some gifts were better given invisibly, she'd learned, preserving dignity along with health. Dubai hit Maya like a wall of heat and light when they emerged from the plane into the eternal summer of the Persian Gulf. She'd seen pictures, of course, watched travel videos, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of this city that seemed to defy physics and common sense. Towering skyscrapers pierced the cloudless sky like glass, and steel declarations of human ambition. Luxury vehicles that belonged in museums glided past on spotless highways. Everything gleamed with a prosperity that made her Midwestern hometown seem like a faded photograph from another century. Rashid guided her through the VIP section of the airport with a hand at the small of her back, their first public appearance as a married couple, she realized, noting the deferential treatment from customs officials who barely glanced at their passports before waving them through. "Welcome home, Mrs. Al-Hashimi," the customs officer said in English, and Maya felt the weight of her new identity settle over her shoulders like an expensive coat that didn't quite fit. She was no longer Maya Jensen's struggling college student. She was someone else now, someone she'd have to learn to be convincing as starting immediately. The Al-Hashimi family estate was located in Emirates Hills, Dubai's most exclusive neighborhood, where homes were measured in tens of millions, and privacy was guaranteed by high walls and sophisticated security systems. Rashid's villa was a stunning blend of traditional Arabic architecture and modern luxury, soaring ceilings, intricate tile work, fountains in every courtyard, and more rooms than Maya could count on a quick walkthrough. "Your suite is here," Rashid said, leading her to a wing of the house that felt larger than her entire former apartment building. "My rooms are on the opposite side. We share common areas, but your private space is exactly that. Private." He showed her the bedroom with its enormous bed and sitting area, the bathroom with fixtures that probably cost more than a car, the closet already filled with clothes selected by stylists who'd studied her measurements and coloring. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked gardens where peacocks wandered freely, and in the distance the Persian Gulf sparkled under the afternoon sun. "Rest today," Rashid said, his tone gentle but businesslike. "Tomorrow we begin the performance. My family expects us for dinner, and they will have many questions. We need to be prepared with consistent answers about how we met, how I proposed, what drew us together." He paused at the door. "If you need anything, press the button by the bed. Staff will assist you." Alone in her suite, Maya sat on the edge of the impossibly soft bed and tried to process the enormity of what she'd done. She was 19 years old, world, thousands of miles from everything familiar, married to a stranger in a country where she didn't speak the language or understand the customs. What had seemed like a practical solution back home now felt like reckless insanity. She pulled out her phone. Rashid had arranged for international service and saw messages from her mother's nurse reporting that her first day of the new treatment protocol had gone well. "That's why you're here, Maya," reminded herself. "For Mom. For a future that doesn't involve choosing between medicine and food." She opened her suitcase and found a small framed photograph she'd packed. Her parents on their 20th wedding anniversary, both smiling with the easy affection of people who'd built a real life together. Her father had died 2 years later in a construction accident, leaving behind medical debt and a wife and daughter who'd had to learn how to survive alone. Maya set the photograph on the nightstand, a talisman from her real life, a reminder that she came from people who understood sacrifice. 6 months, she told herself. You can do anything for 6 months. But as evening fell over Dubai and call to prayer echoed across the city, Maya wondered if pretending to be in love might prove more challenging than she'd imagined. The next morning, Rashid knocked on Maya's door at dawn, dressed impeccably in traditional Emirati attire that somehow made him look both more authoritative and more human. "We need to establish our story before tonight," he said, settling into one of the chairs in her sitting room while she hastily put on a robe over her pajamas, feeling suddenly very young and underprepared. For the next 3 hours, they constructed their fictional romance like architects designing a building. They'd met, they decided, at a charity gala in New York, where Maya had been volunteering while attending college. Rashid had been immediately drawn to her warmth and intelligence. They dated quietly for 6 months, mindful of media attention, before he'd proposed during a private dinner. The story was simple enough to remember, but detailed enough to withstand questioning. "My mother will be the most skeptical," Rashid warned, his expression growing serious. "She's wanted me married for years, but she expected me to choose someone from our social circle, someone with the right family connections and cultural background. An American teenager with no family wealth or status will shock her, perhaps anger her. You need to be prepared for her disapproval." "Tell me about your family," Maya said, sensing that understanding their dynamics would be crucial to her performance. Rashid stood and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back in what she was learning was his thinking posture. "My father built his empire from nothing," he began quietly. "He was a pearl diver's son who educated himself, made shrewd investments, and transformed our family from poverty to prosperity in a single generation. He was a genius at business, but difficult as a father, demanding, impossible to please." Rashid's voice carried old pain carefully contained. "He died 2 years ago, leaving behind a will with conditions I'm still discovering. The marriage requirement was the biggest surprise. My mother, Layla, is traditional but intelligent. She managed to support my father's ambitions while maintaining her own influence in social circles. My younger sister, Amira, is studying architecture in London, the family rebel who actually had the courage to reject an arranged marriage. And then there are my cousins, Khalid and Hassan, my uncle's sons, who believe they deserve my inheritance based purely on their gender and their father's friendship with mine. They've been undermining my business decisions for months, waiting for me to fail the marriage condition so they can seize control." Maya absorbed this information, recognizing the complex web of expectations and rivalries she was stepping into. "What happens after the 6 months?" she asked suddenly. "When we separate, won't your family ask questions? Won't it seem suspicious that our marriage failed so quickly?" Rashid turned from the window, his expression guarded. "I've thought about that," he admitted. "The most believable explanation would be that the cultural differences proved too challenging, or that you became homesick and we mutually agreed to part ways. By then, I'll have secured my inheritance and restructured the business holdings to protect them from my cousin's interference. My family will be disappointed, but not surprised that a marriage between such different worlds didn't last." He paused, studying her face. "Unless you have a better suggestion." Maya thought for a moment, then shook her head. "No, that makes sense. A trial that didn't work out. People will understand that." But even as she agreed, something in her chest tightened uncomfortably at the casual way they were planning the end of their marriage before it had really begun. "It's not a real marriage," she reminded herself firmly. "It's a business arrangement with an expiration date." But the distinction was becoming harder to maintain with each passing hour in Rashid's presence, with each glimpse she got of the complicated man behind the billionaire facade. The Al-Hashimi family dinner that evening was held in a formal dining room that could have hosted 50 guests, but tonight seated only 7. Maya wore a modest but elegant dress that the stylist had assured her struck the right balance between respectful and modern. Her hair pulled back in a simple style, minimal jewelry, except for her stunning wedding ring. Rashid introduced her first to his mother, Layla, a woman in her early 60s whose beauty had aged into something regal and intimidating. "Mother, this is Maya, my wife," Rashid said in English out of courtesy to Maya, though she suspected the family would have preferred Arabic. Layla's dark eyes swept over Maya with an assessment that felt like a physical examination, taking in every detail from her inexpensive shoes to the nervous way she twisted her wedding ring. "Welcome to our family," Layla said finally, her tone polite but distinctly cool. "Rashid has told us so little about you. We had no idea he was even dating someone, let alone ready to marry." The implied criticism hung in the air like smoke, and Maya felt Rashid's hand find hers beneath the table, a reminder that they were in this performance together. Rashid's sister Amira was different, younger, dressed in Western clothes, her expression openly curious rather than judgmental. "So you're the mysterious woman who finally got my brother to settle down," Amira said with a warm smile, ignoring her mother's disapproving look. "I'm dying to know how you managed it. He's been dodging matchmaking attempts for years." Maya smiled back gratefully, finding an unexpected ally. "I didn't manage anything," Maya said honestly. "We just connected. Sometimes the right person appears when you're not looking." The words felt true, even though the circumstances were false, and she saw something shift in Rashid's expression beside her. The cousins, Khalid and Hassan, sat across the table like matching bookends of resentment, their expensive suits and carefully groomed appearances doing nothing to hide the hostility in their eyes. "How convenient," Khalid said with false pleasantness, "that Rashid found love just months before his 36th birthday. One might almost think it was planned." The accusation was barely veiled, and Maya felt tension ripple through Rashid's body beside her. "Love doesn't follow convenient schedules," Maya responded before Rashid could speak, surprising herself with her boldness. "And I'd think family would be happy for Rashid's happiness rather than questioning his timing." She met Khalid's gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated despite her racing heart. "Rashid told me about his father's will, about the marriage requirement. I understand it creates complications, but our relationship isn't about inheritance or business. It's about two people who found each other against all odds." She felt Rashid's hand tighten around hers, and when she glanced at him, she saw something like gratitude in his eyes. The dinner proceeded with painful formality, course after elaborate course, served by silent staff, while conversation remained superficial and tense. Layla asked probing questions about Maya's background, her family, her education, each question designed to highlight the vast gulf between Maya's working-class American reality and the Al-Hashimi family's privileged world. Maya answered as honestly as she could, without revealing the transactional nature of her marriage, feeling like she was walking a tightrope where one wrong step would send their careful deception crashing down. By the time dessert arrived, her face ached from maintaining a pleasant expression, and she longed for the privacy of her suite where she could finally drop the performance. Later that night, Rashid appeared at Maya's suite with 2 glasses of wine and an apologetic expression. "That was worse than I expected," he admitted, settling into the chair across from her. "Sitting area. My mother was particularly harsh, and my cousins were barely civil. I'm sorry you had to endure that." Maya accepted the wine gratefully, still wearing her dinner dress because she'd been too exhausted to change. "Your sister is nice," she offered, finding something positive in the difficult evening. "At least she seemed genuinely happy for you." Rashid smiled slightly. Amira is the only member of my family who prioritizes people over politics. She'll be your ally here. I think, he sipped his wine, his expression growing thoughtful. You handled yourself well tonight, better than I anticipated. When Khalid challenged our timing, you defended us with exactly the right mixture of emotion and dignity. For a moment, I almost believed you myself. His tone was light, attempting to keep things casual, but Maya heard the undercurrent of something else. Maybe respect, maybe curiosity, maybe the beginning of recognition that they were more compatible as partners than either had expected. Tell me the truth, Maya said suddenly, the wine loosening her usual caution. Why didn't you just marry someone from your world, someone your family would approve of? It would have been so much easier than this complicated charade. Rashid was quiet for a long moment, staring into his wine glass as if it contained answers. Because every woman my family suggested came with strings attached, he finally said, his voice low. Strings connecting me to their family's business interests, their social ambitions, their expectations of who I should be. After my father died, I realized I'd spent my entire life trying to meet his standards, becoming the heir he demanded. The marriage requirement in his will felt like control from beyond the grave, his final attempt to dictate my life. He looked up at Maya, his eyes holding unexpected vulnerability. I wanted at least this one thing to be on my terms, a marriage that served my needs, without entangling me in more family politics. A wife who saw me as Rashid rather than as the Al-Hashimi heir. Someone who wouldn't expect emotional investments I'm not capable of making. The last sentence carried a weight that Maya didn't fully understand, but felt nonetheless. What happened to you? Maya asked softly, sensing old wounds beneath his careful control. Who made you believe you're not capable of emotional investment? Rashid's expression shuttered immediately, the vulnerability vanishing behind practiced walls. That's not part of our arrangement, he said, his tone polite but final. We're business partners, Maya. I appreciate your concern, but let's maintain the boundaries we agreed to. He stood, setting down his empty glass. Tomorrow, we're scheduled for a photo shoot for a society magazine. My PR team arranged it to establish our public image as a couple. The stylist will come at 9 to prepare you. We need to appear believably in love, so study the coaching materials they'll provide about appropriate body language and expressions. He moved toward the door, then paused. Tonight, despite the difficult family dynamics, you did well. Keep doing what you're doing, and we'll both survive these 6 months. After he left, Maya sat alone in the too large suite, feeling the strange disconnection of having someone thank her for performing affection while carefully maintaining emotional distance. She'd signed up for this arrangement with her eyes open, but she hadn't anticipated how exhausting it would be to fake intimacy with someone who seemed determined to keep her at arm's length, or how much it would hurt when he occasionally let his guard down before remembering to rebuild his walls. The photo shoot the next day was held at various locations around Dubai, the Burj Khalifa's observation deck, a private beach, the family's yacht in the marina. Maya endured hours of posing while photographers directed them to look at each other more lovingly, to hold hands more naturally, to laugh as if sharing private jokes. Rashid played his part with professional competence, his arm around her waist or his hand brushing her cheek with movements that looked spontaneous but felt carefully calculated. Closer, the photographer kept saying. You're newlyweds, yes? More passion, more connection. Each staged moment of false intimacy felt like a tiny betrayal of something Maya couldn't quite name. During a break, while stylists fussed with her hair and makeup, Maya watched Rashid checking his phone, his expression serious as he dealt with some business crisis. He looked tired beneath his perfect appearance, she realized, shadows under his eyes suggesting sleepless nights, tension in his shoulders that expensive suits couldn't quite hide. This wasn't easy for him either, she understood suddenly. He might be the one with power and money, but he was also performing, pretending, maintaining a facade that maybe wasn't as natural as it appeared. Tell me something real about yourself, Maya said suddenly during their lunch break, surprising both of them with her boldness. They were alone on the yacht's deck, the crew having given them privacy to eat. Rashid looked up from his phone, his expression wary. What do you mean? He asked carefully. Something that's not part of our cover story. Maya clarified. Something true, because we're going to be living together for 6 months, appearing in public together, and if we're going to make this convincing, we need to know each other as actual people, not just as characters in a performance. She took a breath, deciding to lead by example. I'll go first. Real fact about Maya Jensen. I'm terrified of the ocean, even though I want to study marine biology. When I was 7, I nearly drowned at a beach during a family vacation. My dad saved me, but ever since then, I've had panic attacks. Around deep water, I chose marine biology specifically to face that fear, to prove to myself that I could conquer it through knowledge and understanding. She watched Rashid's expression shift, becoming more present, more genuinely interested. Your turn, she said softly. Rashid set down his phone, giving her his full attention for the first time all day. Real fact about Rashid Al-Hashimi, he said slowly, as if testing the waters of authenticity. I wanted to be an architect, not a businessman. When I was young, I used to draw building designs constantly, structures that blended traditional Arabic patterns with modern engineering. I even got accepted to architecture school in London. But my father needed me in the business, needed an heir who understood petroleum markets and international finance. So I put away my sketches and became what was required of me. There was old grief in his voice, the kind that comes from choices made long ago that can never be unmade. Sometimes I drive past buildings I designed in my head years ago, and I see different structures standing where my creations might have been, parallel lives we don't get to live. Maya felt something shift between them, a small crack in the careful distance they'd maintained, a moment of genuine connection in the midst of their elaborate pretense. Maybe that's why you chose this arrangement, she said thoughtfully. Your last chance to build something on your own terms, even if what you're building is an illusion. Rashid looked at her with surprise, then something like recognition. Maybe, he admitted quietly. I hadn't thought of it that way. Their public debut as a married couple came at a charity gala the following week, a glittering affair at the Burj Al Arab, attended by Dubai's elite social circle and covered extensively by local media. Maya wore a dress that cost more than her mother's monthly medical bills, a deep sapphire blue that the stylist said complemented her eyes. Diamonds she didn't own, but had been loaned for the evening, hung around her neck, cold and heavy against her skin. Rashid looked devastating in his formal attire, and when he offered his arm at the limousine door, something in his expression had softened since their conversation on the yacht. Ready? He asked quietly, and Maya nodded, squaring her shoulders. Let's give them a show, she whispered back, earning a genuine smile from him that momentarily forgot to guard itself. The ballroom was overwhelming. Crystal chandeliers, champagne flowing like water, women in jewels that could have funded college scholarships, men in bespoke suits discussing deals worth millions. Maya felt completely out of her depth, a girl from a dying Michigan town, playing dress-up in a world that would never truly accept her. But then Rashid's hand settled at the small of her back, steady and reassuring, and he leaned down to whisper in her ear, breathe. They're just people, Maya. Most of them inherited their wealth rather than earning it. At least you're honest about who you are. His unexpected support steadied her, and together they navigated the social currents of the evening, greeting important business associates, accepting congratulations on their marriage, fielding questions about their courtship with their carefully rehearsed responses. Maya found herself actually enjoying parts of the evening, particularly when Rashid's business mask slipped, and she caught glimpses of the man who'd wanted to design buildings instead of manage petroleum portfolios. He introduced her to a sheik's wife with genuine warmth, to a French ambassador with appropriate deference, to a group of young entrepreneurs with obvious respect. She watched him move through his world with practiced grace and realized that he was performing too, just as much as she was, maybe even more, because this was supposed to be his authentic life, but it clearly felt like a carefully constructed prison. Toward the end of the evening, they found themselves alone on a balcony overlooking the Persian Gulf, the gala's music drifting out through open doors behind them. You're good at this, Rashid said, surprising her with the compliment. Several people commented on how natural we seem together. My mother's friends were particularly impressed. Apparently they'd expected me to marry someone more obvious in their social climbing. Maya laughed softly. Because marrying you for your money is so much better when it's done with authenticity. She hadn't meant to be quite so blunt, but the champagne and exhaustion had loosened her filters. Rashid smiled, really smiled, his eyes crinkling in a way she'd never seen before. At least you're honest about the transaction, he said. Most marriages in my world involve the same calculations. They just pretend otherwise. He turned to face her, the city lights casting shadows across his face. Can I ask you something? If circumstances were different, if we'd met some other way, without the contract, without the complications, would you have given me a chance? Or am I too old, too foreign, too damaged for someone like you? The vulnerability in his question caught Maya off guard, revealing depths she hadn't expected beneath his careful control. Maya considered his question carefully, recognizing that her answer mattered more than casual honesty. I don't know, she said, finally, deciding on truth rather than polite evasion. Before all this, before the contract, I was just a girl working 3 jobs and trying to save her mother. Romance wasn't even on my radar. I didn't have the luxury of thinking about relationships or dating. Every ounce of energy went toward survival. She paused, studying his face in the balcony's soft lighting. But if I had met you somehow, maybe if you'd been a regular at the diner, if we'd gotten to know each other without all the money and power dynamics, then yeah, I think I would have given you a chance. You're more interesting than you pretend to be, Rashid. Underneath the businessman, there's someone who wanted to create beautiful buildings, someone who understands that dreams sometimes have to be sacrificed for duty. That's someone worth knowing. She saw something shift in his expression, a crack in his armor widening slightly. Even despite the age difference? He asked quietly. Even though I'm closer to 40 than 30 and you're still a teenager. Age is just a number until life experience creates gaps too wide to bridge, Maya said thoughtfully. But trauma has a way of accelerating maturity. I've been making adult decisions since I was 14, since my dad died, and suddenly I was the one helping Mum figure out how to survive. In some ways, I feel older than 19. And you, she gestured at him, you seem younger than 35 when you forget to perform. When you talk about architecture, or when you let yourself actually smile instead of doing that controlled businessman expression. Maybe the gap between us isn't as wide as the numbers suggest. Rashid moved closer, his expression serious. This is dangerous territory we're entering, he said softly. We agreed to emotional distance, to treating this as business. But conversations like this, moments like this, they complicate things. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs, suddenly very aware of how close he was standing, how the city lights reflected in his dark eyes, how his cologne mixed with the salt air from the Gulf. Maybe, she whispered, complications aren't always bad. Maybe they're what makes us human, instead of just actors playing roles. For a long moment they stood there on the balcony, the space between them charged with possibility and danger, the boundary of their agreement hanging in the air like something fragile. Then Rashid stepped back, deliberately, rebuilding his walls with visible effort. We should return to the gala, he said, his tone carefully neutral. People will notice if we're absent too long, and we need to maintain appearances. Maya felt the rejection like a physical blow, even though she understood it was self-protection rather than dismissal. Of course, she said, matching his professional tone. Wouldn't want to compromise the performance. They walked back into the ballroom together, his hand at her waist in a gesture that looked intimate but felt suddenly hollow. For the rest of the evening, they maintained their roles perfectly. The devoted newlyweds, the unlikely love story, the bridge between cultures. But something had shifted on that balcony. Some line had been approached, if not crossed, and Maya couldn't shake the feeling that their carefully controlled arrangement was developing complications neither of them had anticipated. As they rode home in silence, the city lights streaming past the limousine windows, she wondered if 6 months would prove too long to maintain emotional distance, or if the real danger was that it wouldn't be long enough to understand what was growing between them. The next morning, Maya woke to find an envelope that had been slid under her door during the night. Inside was a simple pencil sketch, a building design that blended traditional Arabic arches with modern glass and steel, signed with Rashid's initials and dated from 10 years ago. On the back, he'd written in careful script, "Thank you for remembering there was someone besides the heir. It's been a long time since anyone looked past the money to see the person." Maya traced the sketch's lines with her finger, recognizing it as a gift more valuable than all the diamonds she'd worn the night before, a piece of his authentic self, shared voluntarily rather than extracted during interrogation. She dressed quickly and found her way to the kitchen, where staff were preparing breakfast with practiced efficiency. "Is Mr. Al-Hashimi here?" she asked one of the housekeepers. "He left early for the office, madam," the woman replied. "He said to tell you that he has meetings all day, but that you should feel free to explore the house and grounds. The pool and spa are at your disposal, and the driver can take you anywhere you wish to go." Maya thanked her and accepted a coffee, carrying it out to the garden where peacocks wandered between fountains and perfectly manicured flower beds. She spent the day exploring the estate, discovering a library with books in multiple languages, a home theater that could seat 30, a gym that looked like something from a luxury hotel. But the most interesting room was one she found by accident, a study that had clearly been Rashid's father's office, preserved almost like a shrine. Photographs lined the walls showing a stern man in traditional dress meeting with world leaders and business titans. Awards and plaques documented decades of achievement. But what caught Maya's attention was a single photograph on the desk. A young Rashid, maybe 19 or 20, standing beside his father at some formal event, his expression already showing the careful control she recognized from their present interactions. The boy in the photograph looked more sad than proud, despite standing next to his father's obvious achievement. "He was never good enough," Amira's voice said from behind her, and Maya turned to find Rashid's sister standing in the doorway. No matter what Rashid accomplished, father always found something to criticize, some way he'd fallen short. It's why Rashid drives himself so hard now, still trying to prove something to a dead man who never learned how to express approval. "Tell me about your brother," Maya said impulsively, recognizing an opportunity to understand the man she'd married beyond their contract's parameters. Amira settled into one of the leather chairs, her expression becoming thoughtful. "Rashid was different before our father's death," she began. "Not happy exactly, but less imprisoned. He used to take time for things he enjoyed. Sailing, photography, those architecture designs he'd never show anyone. But after father died, and Rashid realized the full extent of the business responsibilities and the conditions of the inheritance, something in him just shut down. He became all duty and no joy." She studied Maya carefully. "When he called to say he'd gotten married, I was shocked. Not just because of the suddenness, but because I couldn't imagine my brother letting anyone close enough for that. He's been so guarded for so long, keeping everyone at a careful distance." Amira paused, then added carefully, "Whatever brought you two together, whatever your story is, and I suspect it's more complicated than the official version, please don't give up on him easily. He needs someone who can see past the armor he wears, who can remember there's still a person underneath all that control." Rashid returned home late that evening to find Maya still in his father's study, surrounded by old photo albums she'd found in a drawer, trying to piece together the story of the man she'd married. "You've been exploring," he said from the doorway, his expression unreadable. Maya looked up guiltily, suddenly aware she might have crossed a boundary by examining his family's private history. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I was curious, and the door was open. I shouldn't have." But Rashid waved off her apology, moving into the room with visible reluctance, as if entering a space that held difficult memories. "It's fine," he said, though his tense shoulders suggested otherwise. "This room has been locked in the past for too long anyway. Maybe it's time someone looked at it with fresh eyes." He picked up one of the albums, flipping through pages that showed his progression from child to teenager to young man, each photograph documenting another step in his transformation from person to heir. "I don't remember when I stopped being myself and started being what he needed me to be," Rashid said quietly, more to himself than to Maya. It happened so gradually that I didn't notice until it was already complete. Maya stood and moved to his side, looking at the photographs over his shoulder. It's not too late to remember, she said softly. You're 35, not 95. You have decades ahead to build the life you want, instead of the one you inherited. Rashid turned to face her, his expression holding vulnerability she'd rarely seen. But what if I've forgotten who I wanted to be? What if I've performed the role so long that there's nothing authentic left underneath? The question held real fear, Maya realized. Not fear of failure or financial loss, but something deeper and more existential. Then maybe we figure it out. Together, she heard herself saying. You help me survive this complicated world I've entered, and I'll help remind you that you're more than your father's expectations. Partners, remember, just in a different way than we originally planned. She saw something shift in his expression, a crack widening in the walls he'd built around himself. Maya, he said, her name carrying warning or invitation, or maybe both. We're in danger of forgetting why we're doing this, of making this arrangement into something it's not supposed to be. Maybe, Maya admitted, her heart hammering. Or maybe we're finally being honest about what it actually is. Two people helping each other survive circumstances neither of us chose, learning to trust each other because that's the only way this works. She took a breath, deciding to risk complete honesty. I know what our contract says. I know this is supposed to end in 6 months with a clean separation. But for these 6 months, while we're living this life together, wouldn't it be better to actually be friends rather than just co-workers? To actually know each other rather than just memorizing facts for public consumption? Rashid studied her face for a long moment, and she could almost see the internal battle playing out. His desire for authentic connection, fighting against his fear of vulnerability. Friendship, he said finally, carefully. We can try friendship. But Maya, you need to understand, I'm not good at letting people close. I'll probably disappoint you, probably retreat when things feel too genuine. It's who I've become, for better or worse. Maya smiled, recognizing the offer for what it was, not a promise of perfection, but a commitment to try. Then we'll both just have to learn how to be real with each other, she said, imperfectly, honestly, without pretending we're anything other than two complicated people trying to survive 6 months without losing themselves. They stood there in his father's study, surrounded by photographs of expectations and duty, and made an unspoken agreement to try something different, something that might prove more difficult than their original transaction, but infinitely more valuable. The following weeks developed into an unexpected rhythm. Rashid made efforts to return home for dinner more evenings, and they'd begun sharing meals in the informal dining room rather than retreating to their separate suites. They talked about everything except the most important things, their conversations dancing around genuine intimacy, while slowly building something that looked increasingly like actual friendship. Rashid showed Maya his old architecture designs, explaining the principles behind each structure with an enthusiasm that transformed his usually guarded expression. Maya told him about her dreams of marine biology, her fear of the ocean, her memories of her father. They discovered shared interests in unexpected places. Both loved mystery novels. Both had complicated relationships with classical music. Both understood what it meant to sacrifice personal desires for family obligations. The physical distance they'd carefully maintained began to erode naturally. Sitting closer on the couch while watching movies, Rashid's hand finding hers without thinking when they walked through the gardens, Maya leaning against his shoulder when she fell asleep during late-night conversations. Neither acknowledged the shift, both pretending it was just part of the performance, even when no one was watching. But the outside world continued to intrude on their carefully constructed bubble. Khalid and Hassan had been circulating rumors about Maya's background, questioning the legitimacy of the marriage, suggesting Rashid had hired an actress to play his wife. The business press picked up the story, running speculative articles about the rushed wedding and suspicious timing. Rashid's lawyers sent cease and desist letters, but the damage to their credibility was accumulating. We need to prove the marriage is real, Rashid said one evening, his expression troubled as he showed Maya the latest articles on his tablet. "My cousins are building a case that this is fraud, that I'm circumventing the will's spirit, if not its letter. They've hired investigators to look into your background, our relationship timeline, everything." Maya felt a chill run through her. "What happens if they prove it's not a real marriage?" she asked quietly. "Do you lose the inheritance?" Rashid nodded grimly. "And potentially face legal consequences for will fraud. My cousins have resources and motivation. If they can prove this is a business arrangement rather than a genuine marriage, they could not only take control of the company, but potentially destroy my reputation entirely. I'd lose everything my father built." "Then we make it more convincing," Maya said firmly, pushing aside her own fear. "What do we need to do? More public appearances? More social media presence?" But Rashid shook his head. "It's not about appearances anymore. They're questioning whether we actually live as a married couple, whether there's genuine intimacy in our relationship. They're suggesting that separate bedrooms and careful distance prove this is purely transactional." He met her eyes, his expression conflicted. "I never intended to ask this of you, Maya. It's beyond what we agreed to, but my lawyers are advising that we need to appear more authentically involved, not necessarily physically intimate," he added quickly, "but at least sharing living space, demonstrating the casual intimacy that real couples show." Maya felt her heart rate increase, understanding what he was asking. "You want me to move into your suite," she said carefully, "or you move into mine? Share a bedroom actually instead of just pretending to?" Rashid nodded slowly. "Just for appearances. Separate beds if you prefer. But yes, we need to convince anyone who might be investigating that this is a genuine marriage, not a business arrangement." "I'm sorry, Maya. I know this wasn't part of our deal. If you want to leave, if this is too much, I'll understand. The contract can be voided, and you'll still receive significant compensation. I won't hold you to terms that have changed so drastically." Maya sat with Rashid's offer hanging in the air between them, her mind racing through implications and consequences. She could leave, walk away from the increasingly complicated situation with enough money to solve her immediate problems, return to her familiar life, forget about Dubai and billionaires and marriages that weren't supposed to become real. It would be the safe choice, the sensible choice, the choice that protected her heart from the confusion she was already feeling toward the man who'd hired her to play his wife. But leaving also meant abandoning Rashid to face his cousin's schemes alone, potentially losing everything he'd worked to protect, watching the company his father built fall into hands that would destroy it. "I'll stay," she heard herself saying, watching surprise and relief flood Rashid's expression. "We'll make this work, make it convincing." "But Rashid," she held his gaze steadily, "we need to be honest with each other about what's happening here. We're not just business partners anymore. Somewhere in the last few weeks, we became friends, and now we're going to be sharing intimate space, pretending affection that's becoming less pretense with every day. That's dangerous territory for both of us." "I know," Rashid said quietly, his voice carrying vulnerability she'd rarely heard. "I've been trying to maintain the emotional distance we agreed to, but you're right. It's becoming harder to remember where the performance ends and genuine feeling begins. You're not what I expected, Maya. You're stronger, smarter, more perceptive than I gave you credit for initially. You see things about me that I'd forgotten myself, and you're not afraid to call me out when I'm hiding behind my businessman facade." He paused, seeming to gather courage. "If we do this, if we share living space and increase intimacy to make this more convincing, we need ground rules, clear boundaries that protect us both. Because I meant what I said before. I'm not capable of the kind of relationship you deserve. I'm too damaged by my father's expectations, too scarred by years of performing rather than feeling. In 6 months, you're going to leave Dubai, return to your life, finish your education. You're 19 years old with your whole future ahead of you. I can't be the mistake you make that derails that future. What if I'm willing to take that risk?" Maya asked softly, surprising herself with the question. "What if the mistake isn't getting too close to you, but rather protecting myself so carefully that I miss the chance to experience something real, even if it's temporary. Rashid moved closer, his expression both drawn and resistant. Maya, you need to understand something. After we separate, after you return home, I'll go back to being exactly what I was before, the Al-Hashimi heir, focused on business, keeping everyone at emotional distance. This marriage, this connection between us, it's a parenthesis in my life, not a transformation. I can't become someone different for you, no matter how much I might want to in this moment. His honesty hurt, but Maya appreciated it more than false promises. I understand, she said. You're telling me not to fall in love with you, not to mistake temporary partnership for permanent connection. I hear you, Rashid, but I'm also telling you that I'm 19, not stupid. I know this is temporary. I know we come from different worlds that will eventually reclaim us both. But for these 6 months, for this strange parenthesis in both our lives, can't we just be honest with each other? Feel what we feel without pretending indifference? We can maintain boundaries and still acknowledge reality. She watched him struggle with her words, saw the battle between his desire for authentic connection and his need for self-protection. They decided Maya would move into Rashid's suite, which was larger and had a sitting room that could function as separate space when needed. The staff moved her belongings with discreet efficiency, hanging her clothes in half of his enormous closet, placing her toiletries in the bathroom they'd now share, setting up her books and laptop in the sitting room. That first night, they moved around each other with awkward formality, neither quite sure how to navigate the new intimacy of shared space. Rashid gave her the bed, insisting he'd sleep on the sofa in the sitting room, but Maya argued that was both uncomfortable and would defeat the purpose if staff noticed. We can share the bed, she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. It's enormous. There's probably 6 feet between the two sides. We can maintain boundaries and still appear to be actually sleeping together. She saw him hesitate, saw his careful control wavering. Are you certain? He asked quietly. This crosses a significant line from what we originally agreed to. Maya nodded, even as her heart hammered. We crossed that line weeks ago when we became friends instead of co-workers. This is just the next step in making our arrangement more convincing. That first night sharing a bed was simultaneously awkward and strangely comfortable. They maintained careful distance, Rashid reading business reports on his side, while Maya worked on a marine biology assignment her online professors had sent. But as the night deepened and exhaustion overcame self-consciousness, the distance between them gradually narrowed. Maya woke once in the darkness to find herself curled against Rashid's side, his arm around her shoulders, their breathing synchronized in sleep. She should have moved away, should have preserved the boundaries they'd discussed. Instead, she let herself enjoy the warmth and safety of another person's presence, something she hadn't realized she'd been starving for until it was suddenly available. When morning came, and she woke alone, Rashid already up and in the shower, she wondered if he'd noticed their nighttime proximity, if he'd carefully extracted himself without waking her, if he regretted the compromise they'd made. But at breakfast, he seemed almost relaxed. His usual guardedness softened slightly, and when his hand brushed hers reaching for the coffee pot, neither of them pulled away immediately. The shift in their living arrangement coincided with increased media attention. Photographs of them began appearing regularly in society pages and social media. Rashid's hand at Maya's waist at a business dinner, Maya laughing at something Rashid whispered during a charity auction, the two of them walking through a mall with Rashid carrying shopping bags like any devoted husband. The narrative being constructed was one of unexpected but genuine love. The sophisticated billionaire who'd found authenticity with an American girl from modest circumstances. The cross-cultural romance that defied expectations. Maya's social media following exploded from her. Personal accounts, few dozen friends, to thousands of followers fascinated by her Cinderella story. Hate mail came too, of course. Messages from women who'd wanted Rashid for themselves, from people who believed Maya was a gold digger, from those who thought their age difference was inappropriate. Rashid's PR team managed the worst of it, but Maya couldn't help reading comments late at night when she couldn't sleep, wondering if the critics were right, if she was just a naive teenager, being used in a billionaire's elaborate game. But then Rashid would find her looking at her phone with troubled expression, would take it away without asking, would remind her that other people's opinions didn't define their reality, and she'd remember that whatever they were building between them, friends, partners, something unnamed and complicated, it mattered more than public perception. 3 months into their arrangement, Maya's mother's doctors in New York sent news that the aggressive treatment protocol was working better than expected. Linda Jensen's tumors were shrinking significantly, her prognosis improving from months to potentially years. Maya cried when she received the call, and Rashid held her without awkwardness, his presence steady and comforting. "Thank you," Maya whispered against his shoulder. "None of this would have been possible without you, without this arrangement. You gave my mother a chance to live." Rashid's arms tightened around her. Briefly, "You've given me more than you realize," he said quietly. "You've reminded me that life isn't just duty and obligations, that it's possible to care about someone without it being a calculation or strategy. That's worth more than money." They stood together in their shared suite, the afternoon light streaming through windows overlooking the Persian Gulf, and Maya felt the walls between them dissolve a little more. She knew she was falling for him, had probably been falling since. Those first real conversations on the yacht, maybe even since he'd offered her an impossible solution to her impossible problems. She knew it was dangerous, knew she'd promised herself to protect her heart, but standing there in his arms with her mother's reprieve singing through her veins, she couldn't bring herself to care about future pain when present joy was finally available. That night, they broke their unspoken rule about emotional distance, lying in bed, neither pretending to sleep. Rashid turned to face her in the darkness. "Tell me something you've never told anyone else," he said softly, his hand finding hers between their pillows. Maya thought for a moment, then answered with raw honesty. "Sometimes I'm angry at my mother for getting sick," she whispered. "I love her desperately, and I'd do anything to save her, but sometimes I resent that her illness consumed my teenage years, that I had to become an adult at 14 instead of being allowed to just be a kid. Then I hate myself for feeling that way because it's not her fault and she's suffering so much more than I am." She felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "I've never said that out loud before, never admitted that sometimes I look at my college classmates with their normal lives and normal problems, and I'm jealous of what they have. The luxury of worrying about grades instead of medical bills, the freedom to make mistakes without catastrophic consequences." Rashid's thumb brushed away her tears gently. "Resentment doesn't make you a bad daughter," he said. "It makes you human. Your mother would understand. Good parents don't want their children to sacrifice everything for them, even when circumstances force those sacrifices." "Your turn," Maya said, her voice still thick with emotion. "Tell me something real, something you've kept hidden." Rashid was quiet for so long that Maya thought he might refuse, might retreat behind his walls. But finally his voice came through the darkness, raw and unguarded. "I was engaged once," he said slowly. 7 years ago, when I was 28. Her name was Yasmin, daughter of a family friend, someone my father approved of. We were planning the wedding when I discovered she'd been feeding my business strategies to my cousins, helping them undermine my projects in exchange for promises of better financial arrangements once they took control of the company. She saw our marriage as a business. Opportunity, nothing more. I should have expected it. That's how my world works, after all. But discovering her betrayal felt like having my naivety beaten out of me. Since then, I've kept everyone at a distance, treated all relationships as potential threats, refused to trust anyone with anything real. He paused, his hand tightening around Maya's. "Until you. Somehow you've slipped past all my defenses, made me care again despite my determination not to. You're either remarkably manipulative or genuinely different from everyone else in my life, and I honestly don't know which frightens me more." Maya heard the vulnerability beneath his words, understood that this confession was a gift more valuable than diamonds. "I'm not Yasmin," she said softly. And this is not that relationship. Whatever we are to each other, it's built on honesty from the beginning. You've never pretended this was about love, and I've never pretended I'm not benefiting from our arrangement. Maybe that's why it works, because we started with truth instead of illusions. The next morning, Maya woke to find Rashid gone, not just out of bed, but out of the house entirely, his car already absent from the garage. A note on his pillow said simply, "Had to fly to Abu Dhabi for emergency meetings. Back tomorrow evening." Maya felt the distance in that brief message, recognized it as his retreat after the previous night's vulnerability. She'd seen this pattern before. Any time their emotional intimacy reached a certain threshold, Rashid would pull back, would remind her through actions, if not words, that this arrangement had boundaries he wouldn't allow them to cross. It hurt more than it should have, given that she'd promised herself not to expect more than he could give. But promises to oneself were easier made than kept, especially when every day brought new evidence that what was growing between them transcended their original transaction. She spent the day with Amira, who'd become a genuine friend, the two of them shopping in Dubai Mall and talking about everything except the complicated situation Maya found herself in. But Amira wasn't fooled. "He's running scared," she said, over coffee in a cafe overlooking the fountain shows. "My brother does this whenever someone gets close enough to matter. He creates distance to prove to himself he's still in control, still invulnerable. The question is whether you're willing to wait for him to stop running. What if waiting is just enabling him to avoid growth?" Maya asked, her frustration evident despite her attempts to sound philosophical. "What if by staying, by accepting his patterns of intimacy and retreat, I'm just helping him avoid ever having to really confront what he's afraid of?" Amira considered this thoughtfully. "Maybe," she admitted. "Or maybe you're giving him something he's never had before. Consistency without demands. Presence without pressure. Rashid has spent his entire life with people who wanted to change him, or use him, or control him. You're the first person who seems content to just be with him, exactly as he is, without an agenda beyond the terms you both agreed to." She paused, studying Maya's face. "Can I tell you something? I've known my brother for 35 years, and I've never seen him as relaxed or as close to genuine happiness as he is with you. Yes, he retreats sometimes. Yes, he's guarded and complicated, but he's also trying, in his limited way, to be more real with you than he's been with anyone since our father destroyed his ability to trust himself. That has to count for something." Maya absorbed her words, recognizing truth in them, even as her heart ached with the impossible complexity of loving someone who'd specifically warned her not to fall in love. Rashid returned the next evening as promised, looking exhausted from back-to-back meetings and clearly troubled by whatever business crisis had required his emergency attention. Maya waited for him to retreat to his study, as he usually did after difficult trips, to reinforce his boundaries and remind her of their arrangement's professional nature. Instead, he found her in their shared sitting room and sank onto the couch beside her with a heavy sigh. "Tell me something good about your day," he said quietly. "Something uncomplicated and real. I need to remember that not everything is about business, strategies, and family conflicts." Maya recognized this as a form of apology for his retreat, his way of reconnecting without explicitly acknowledging he'd pulled away. "I met your mother for tea," she said, watching his expression sharpen with surprise. "Amira arranged it. We talked about you, actually. Your mother showed me photographs of you as a child, before you learned to guard yourself so carefully. There was one picture, you must have been about 8, where you're holding up a drawing of a building you designed. Your whole face is lit up with pure joy and pride, no shadow of self-protection or performance." I asked her what happened to that joy, and she got very quiet. Then she said his father loved him, but he loved the company more, and Rashid learned which came first. It broke my heart, Rashid, not just for that little boy who lost his joy, but for the man you've become. still talented, still capable of that creativity and passion, but convinced you have to hide it all behind business competence. She paused, meeting his eyes directly. Your mother asked me to remind you that your father's expectations don't have to define your life anymore. He's gone, and you're still here, and you get to decide who you want to be now. Something shifted in Rashid's expression as he processed Maya's words, not quite breaking, but definitely cracking, the walls he'd maintained for so long showing visible fractures. I don't know how to be anyone other than who I've become, he said, his voice rough with emotion he rarely allowed to surface. The person I might have been, the architect, the dreamer. He died so gradually that there was never a moment to mourn him. He just faded away until all that was left was duty and responsibility and control. He stood abruptly, pacing to the window, his shoulders tense with frustration or grief or both. And now you're here, reminding me of everything I gave up, making me question choices I made years ago that can't be unmade. It's not fair, Maya. You're supposed to be a business arrangement, a solution to a problem, not someone who sees past every defense I've spent decades building. You're 19 years old. You're supposed to be impressed by the money and the power, not looking at me with those eyes that see everything I've tried to hide, not making me want things I specifically structured my life to avoid wanting. His words carried equal parts accusation and confession, his careful control finally shattering under the weight of everything they'd been pretending not to feel. Maya stood and walked to him, her heart hammering, but her resolve steady. I know what our contract says, she said quietly. I know this is supposed to end in 3 months with a clean separation. I know you don't want complications or emotional entanglements. But Rashid, she placed her hand on his arm, feeling him tense under her touch. It's already complicated. We've already become entangled. Pretending otherwise doesn't make it less true. It just makes us dishonest about what's happening. She took a breath, deciding to risk complete vulnerability. I'm falling in love with you. Maybe I've been falling since that first night in the diner when you saw me as a person instead of just a waitress. Maybe it happened gradually over these months of sharing meals and conversations and eventually a bed. But it's real, and it's happening, and denying it won't make it go away. She watched fear and longing war in his expression. I'm not asking you to love me back. I'm not demanding you become someone different or give me promises you can't keep. I'm just being honest about what I feel because we agreed to truth between us, even when it's uncomfortable. For a long moment, Rashid simply stared at her, his expression cycling through disbelief, panic, and something that looked heartbreakingly like hope. Then he pulled her into his arms with sudden urgency, holding her tightly enough that she could feel his heart racing against her cheek. You're going to break my heart, he whispered into her hair, or I'm going to break yours, or we're going to break each other's. This can't end well, Maya. The contract, the age difference, our different worlds, everything is stacked against us. But even as he spoke, his arms didn't loosen, his body didn't pull away. I know, Maya whispered back. I know all the reasons this is a terrible idea. But Rashid, what if the real mistake is protecting ourselves so carefully from pain that we miss the chance for joy? What if these 3 months we have left could be something real instead of just a performance? We're already living together, already sharing intimate space, already know each other better than most couples who've been together for years. What if, instead of counting down to our separation, we just see where this goes? No expectations beyond honesty, no promises beyond presence, just 2 people choosing to be together for however long we have. She felt him shudder slightly, felt his walls finally truly crumbling. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. I don't know how to let someone in without calculating angles or protecting myself. I'll probably mess this up spectacularly. Maya pulled back enough to meet his eyes, seeing vulnerability there that took her breath away. Then we'll mess it up together, she said softly. Imperfectly, honestly, without pretending we're anything other than 2 complicated people who found each other against all odds. That's all we can do, try and be real with each other and see if what we're building can survive the complications we both bring to it. And there, in their shared suite overlooking the Persian Gulf, as the sun set over the city they'd learned to navigate navigate together, Rashid Al-Hashimi finally stopped running from what terrified him most, lowering his mouth to Maya Jensen's in a kiss that was nothing like the chaste press of lips at their civil ceremony. This kiss was honest and desperate and full of 3 months of denied feeling, a kiss that acknowledged they'd crossed every boundary they'd carefully constructed, that their business arrangement had transformed into something neither money nor contracts could define. And for the first time in years, Rashid allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, the life he'd thought he had to give up might still be possible after all.